Natalie Foster scrubbed the marble kitchen floor on her hands and knees, her fingers red and raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. At 24 years old, she had spent the last 15 years of her life in this mansion. Yet she had never truly belonged here. The house on Riverside Avenue was grand, with its sweeping staircases and crystal chandeliers, but to Natalie, it felt more like a prison than a home. Victoria Foster's sharp voice cut through the quiet morning air. The silver needs polishing before tonight's gala. And don't you dare leave water spots this time. Yes, Mrs. Foster, Natalie replied softly, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She never called Victoria mother anymore. That privilege had been revoked years ago, shortly after her adoptive father, Robert Foster, had passed away. He had been the only person who ever showed her genuine kindness, who made her feel like she mattered. Celeste Foster, Victoria's biological daughter, glided down the stairs in her silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at this early hour. She was the same age as Natalie, but the two young women couldn't have been more different. Where Celeste lived a life of luxury and leisure, Natalie worked from dawn until midnight, cleaning, cooking, and serving. "Tell her to be extra careful with my dress tonight," Celeste said, not even bothering to look at Natalie. "It's a designer original, worth more than she could earn in a year." Victoria smiled at her daughter with obvious pride. "Don't worry, darling. She knows better than to ruin it." The unexpected invitation that afternoon, while sorting through the mail. Natalie discovered an elegant cream-colored envelope addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to the annual Heritage Foundation Gala, one of the most exclusive charity events in the city. But how could this be? She was never invited anywhere. What is that? Victoria snatched the invitation from Natalie's hands, her eyes scanning it quickly. Her face turned pale, then red with anger. This must be a mistake. They probably meant to send it to Celeste. "It has my name on it," Natalie said quietly, though her heart was racing. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You will not embarrass this family by showing up at such an important event. Do you understand me?" But something inside Natalie stirred, a small flame of rebellion that had been dormant for years. Her father Robert had left her a small trust fund, one that Victoria couldn't touch. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a dress and a taxi. "I'm going," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm nonetheless. The gala night, the Heritage Foundation Gala, was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a stunning building with marble columns and gold accents. Natalie arrived in a simple black dress, nothing like the elaborate gowns the other women wore, but it was clean and elegant. She had styled her long dark hair in soft waves, and for the first time in years, she felt almost beautiful. As she entered the grand ballroom, heads turned, but not in admiration. She could hear the whispers, see the pointed stares. Victoria and Celeste stood near the champagne fountain, and when they spotted Natalie, their faces twisted with rage and disgust. "I can't believe she actually came," Celeste hissed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Someone should tell her this event is for distinguished guests, not servants." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Natalie felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she held her head high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. That's when she saw him. Jonathan Pierce stood across the room, tall and commanding in his tailored black suit. At 32, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, known for his brilliant mind and his mysterious past. He had built his empire from nothing. His presence at any event was considered a great honor. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Natalie felt something shift inside her chest. He was looking at her not with pity or mockery, but with genuine curiosity. The humiliation Victoria seized the opportunity to publicly shame Natalie. She stepped onto the small stage where the auction would later take place and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize for an awkward situation," Victoria announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It seems my adopted daughter has confused herself with an actual member of our family. Natalie, dear, this event is for donors and supporters, not household staff." The room erupted in cruel laughter. Natalie felt the world spinning around her. She wanted to run, to disappear, to never show her face again. But then Jonathan Pierce moved. He walked straight through the crowd, his steps deliberate and purposeful, until he stood directly in front of Natalie. The room fell silent, everyone watching with bated breath. "Miss Foster," he said, his deep voice carrying across the ballroom. "I believe this dance is mine." He extended his hand to her, and Natalie stared at it in disbelief. The most powerful man in the room was asking her to dance, right in front of everyone who had just mocked her. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady, anchoring her to the moment. As they moved to the dance floor, Jonathan leaned close and whispered, "Don't let them see you break. You're stronger than they know." Natalie looked up into his kind eyes and felt tears threatening to spill, but she blinked them back. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I recognize something in you," he said quietly as they began to waltz. "Something precious that others are too blind to see." In that moment, as they danced beneath the crystal chandeliers while the entire room watched in stunned silence, Natalie Foster felt truly seen for the first time in 15 years. She didn't know that this man, this mysterious billionaire who had rescued her from humiliation, held the key to secrets that would change her life forever. Victoria and Celeste watched from the sidelines, their faces twisted with jealousy and rage. They had tried to destroy Natalie's spirit, but instead, they had just witnessed the beginning of her transformation. The night was far from over. The truth was waiting to be discovered. Natalie barely slept that night. She kept replaying the moment Jonathan Pierce had taken her hand, the way the entire ballroom had fallen silent, the shock on Victoria's face. When dawn broke, she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small attic room, the only space in the entire Foster mansion that was truly hers. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Cafe at 10. We need to talk. Jonathan Pierce." Her heart skipped a beat. How did he get her number? Why did he want to see her? Natalie's hands shook as she typed a simple reply. "I'll be there." She slipped out of the house before Victoria and Celeste woke up, grateful for the early morning silence. The cafe was a small, cozy place overlooking the river, far from the usual haunts of high society. When she arrived, Jonathan was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. "You came," he said, standing as she approached. His formal demeanor from the gala had softened slightly, though he still carried an air of quiet authority. "You asked me to," Natalie replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "Though I'm not sure why." Jonathan studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me about your adoption. How did you come to live with the Fosters?" "The investigation begins." Natalie wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. "I was 9 years old when Robert Foster brought me home. He found me at St. Catherine's orphanage. He said he felt a connection to me, that I reminded him of someone important. Victoria never wanted me there, but Robert insisted." "Do you remember anything from before the orphanage?" Jonathan asked, his eyes intent on her face. Natalie hesitated. There was one thing, one precious memory she had never shared with anyone. "I remember a locket. It was silver with intricate engravings of roses. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, but I was too young to remember the faces clearly. The orphanage director took it from me, said it would be kept safe until I was older. But when I asked about it years later, she claimed it had been lost." Jonathan's expression changed subtly, something flickering in his eyes that Natalie couldn't quite read. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. "Did it look like this?" Natalie gasped. On the screen was an image of the exact locket from her memories, down to the delicate rose engravings. "How do you have this? Where did you find it?" "I didn't find it," Jonathan said quietly. "I've had it for 20 years. It belonged to my sister, Grace Pierce." Oh. The cafe seemed to tilt around Natalie. "Your sister?" "Grace was 7 years older than me. When I was 12 and she was 19, she fell in love with a man our parents disapproved of. They eloped, and our father disowned her. She had a baby girl, but there were complications during childbirth. Grace died, and the baby disappeared. My parents were too proud to search for their granddaughter. They wanted to forget Grace ever existed. Natalie felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. What happened to the baby? That's what I've been trying to find out for the past 10 years, Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion. After my parents passed away, I inherited everything and started searching for my niece. I hired investigators, searched orphanage records, followed every lead. Then last week, one of my investigators found something interesting. A girl named Natalie, adopted from St. Catherine's Orphanage 15 years ago, who matched the approximate age and description. The locket secret Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the silver locket, exactly as Natalie remembered it. With gentle fingers, he opened it to reveal 2 faded photographs. One showed a beautiful young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. The other showed a man with a warm smile. "This is Grace," Jonathan said, pointing to the woman. And this was her husband, Thomas Bennett. He died in a car accident 6 months after Grace passed away. The baby was their only legacy. Natalie stared at the photographs, and suddenly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, she saw it. The shape of the woman's eyes, the curve of her smile, the way her dark hair fell in soft waves. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera, switching it to selfie mode. The resemblance was undeniable. "I need to run a DNA test," Jonathan said gently. "I know this is overwhelming, but if you're willing, we can know for certain within a few days." Natalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Could it be possible? Could she actually have a family? A real family? After all these years of feeling utterly alone? Victoria's desperation news of Natalie's meeting with Jonathan Pierce spread quickly through their social circle. By the time Natalie returned to the Foster mansion that afternoon, Victoria was waiting for her in the foyer, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Where have you been?" Victoria demanded. "Out gallivanting with Jonathan Pierce, trying to seduce him with your pathetic sob story." "I was having coffee," Natalie said calmly, though her heart was racing. "It's none of your concern. Everything you do is my concern," Victoria hissed, stepping closer. "You live under my roof, eat my food, wear clothes I provide. You are nothing without this family." For the first time in 15 years, Natalie looked Victoria directly in the eye without flinching. "Robert Foster was a good man who gave me a home when I needed one. But you, Victoria, you've never been family to me. You've been a warden, nothing more." Victoria's hand flew up to slap her, but Natalie caught her wrist mid-air. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. "Don't ever touch me again," Natalie said quietly. Releasing Victoria's wrist, Celeste appeared at the top of the stairs, her phone in hand. "Mother, you need to see this. It's all over social media." Victoria snatched the phone and her face went white. Someone had posted photos from the gala, images of Jonathan Pierce dancing with Natalie, looking at her with unmistakable tenderness. The caption read, "Billionaire Jonathan Pierce and mysterious beauty steal the show at Heritage Gala." The comments were flooding in. "Who is she? She's beautiful. They look perfect together. Love this Cinderella story." The growing connection, over the next 3 days, while waiting for the DNA results, Jonathan and Natalie met every morning at the Riverside Cafe. They talked about everything. His childhood growing up in a cold, strict household. Her memories of life before the orphanage. Their shared love of old books and classical music, Jonathan told. Her about building his company from nothing after his parents cut him off for refusing to marry the woman they had chosen for him. Natalie shared her dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams she had buried under years of servitude. "Why did you help me at the gala?" Natalie asked on the 3rd morning. "Even before you suspected I might be your niece." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Because I saw someone brave enough to stand in a room full of people who wanted to break her spirit. Because I recognize that kind of strength. It's rare and precious." "I didn't feel very strong," Natalie admitted. "I wanted to run away and never come back." "But you didn't run," Jonathan said, reaching across the table to gently touch her hand. "That's what makes you strong." The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Natalie. This wasn't just about finding family anymore. Something deeper was growing between them, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The Cal and the 4th day. Jonathan's phone rang during their morning coffee. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew serious. "It's the laboratory." Natalie felt her breath catch in her throat as he answered. She watched his face carefully, trying to read every micro-expression, every subtle shift in his eyes. "Yes, this is Jonathan Pierce," he said into the phone. "I see. And you're certain?" "There's no possibility of error?" "I understand. Thank you." He ended the call and looked at Natalie, his eyes shining with emotion she had never seen before. "The DNA test is positive," he said, his voice thick. "Natalie, you're Grace's daughter. You're my niece. Your family." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. Jonathan stood and moved to her side of the table, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. "You never have to be alone again." In that moment, everything changed. Natalie Foster wasn't just the unwanted adopted girl anymore. She was Natalie Bennett, heir to the Pierce family legacy, and she had finally found where she truly belonged. But Victoria Foster wasn't ready to let go without a fight, and the secrets she had been hiding for 15 years were about to come crashing into the light. 2 days after the DNA results confirmed Natalie's identity, Jonathan arranged a meeting at his downtown office. The Pierce Industries building stood tall against the city skyline, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reflected the morning sun. Natalie rode the private elevator to the top floor, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. Inside the elegant conference room, Jonathan stood with an older gentleman in a crisp gray suit. "Natalie, this is Richard Hamilton, my family's attorney. He has some important information about your inheritance." Richard shook her hand warmly and gestured for her to sit. He opened a thick manila folder and pulled out several documents. "Miss Bennett, when your mother Grace Pierce eloped with Thomas Bennett, your grandfather established a trust fund for any children she might have. Despite disowning her publicly, he never completely severed the legal ties. The trust has been accumulating interest for 25 years. Natalie's hands trembled as Richard slid a document across the polished table. The number at the bottom made her dizzy. $12 million. Furthermore, Richard continued, as the only direct descendant of Grace Pierce, you are entitled to a portion of the Pierce family estate. Combined with the trust, your total inheritance comes to approximately $38 million. The room spun around Natalie. Just a week ago, she had been scrubbing floors and polishing silver. Now she was a millionaire many times over. "There's one more thing," Richard said, his expression growing serious. "We've discovered some disturbing information about your adoption. May I ask, did Robert Foster ever mention how he found you at St. Catherine's orphanage?" Natalie shook her head. "He just said he felt drawn to me, that I reminded him of someone special." Jonathan and Richard exchanged meaningful glances. "We need to pay a visit to Victoria Foster," Jonathan said quietly. "And I think you should be there when we confront her." The confrontation that afternoon, Jonathan's black luxury car pulled up in front of the Foster mansion. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap. Jonathan reached over and gently took her hand. "Whatever happens in there, remember that you're not that frightened girl anymore. You're Natalie Bennett, and you have every right to demand the truth." His touch sent warmth flooding through her, and Natalie realized that her feelings for Jonathan had grown into something far deeper than gratitude. She looked at their intertwined fingers and felt her heart skip. They walked to the front door together. And for the first time in 15 years, Natalie didn't use the servant's entrance. She rang the bell like a guest. Victoria opened the door herself, her face going pale when she saw them. "What is this?" "Natalie, how dare you bring someone here without permission?" "I don't need your permission anymore," Natalie said calmly. "We need to talk, Victoria." "About how Robert really found me?" Victoria's composure cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about. Robert chose you from the orphanage. That's all there is to it." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice cold and authoritative. "Mrs. Foster, we have documentation from St. Catherine's orphanage. We know that Robert didn't randomly choose Natalie. Someone told him exactly which child to adopt. Someone who knew her true identity." The color drained completely from Victoria's face. Celeste appeared behind her mother, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mother, what are they talking about?" The terrible truth, Victoria's shoulders sagged in defeat. She stepped back, allowing them to enter. In the grand living room where Natalie had cleaned and served for years, they all sat down. Victoria poured herself a large glass of wine with shaking hands. "Robert's business was failing," Victoria began, her voice hollow. 15 years ago, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. He had made terrible investments, and we were going to lose everything. Then one day a private investigator approached him with an offer. "What kind of offer?" Jonathan's voice was dangerously quiet. Investigator said he was hired by someone who wanted to hide a child, make her disappear into obscurity. If Robert adopted the girl and raised her as a servant, never revealing her true identity, he would receive $5 million, enough to save his business and our lifestyle. Natalie felt sick to her stomach. "Robert sold me? He took money to hide who I was." Victoria shook her head, and for the first time, genuine emotion crossed her face. "Robert didn't know who hired the investigator. He justified it by saying he was giving you a home, saving you from the orphanage. But as the years passed, guilt consumed him. He started investigating on his own, trying to find out who your real family was. That's why he was so kind to you, Natalie. He was trying to make up for what he had done." "Who hired the investigator?" Jonathan demanded. "Who paid to have my niece hidden away?" Victoria's hands trembled as she took another sip of wine. "Robert found out 2 years before he died. It was your parents, Mr. Pierce. Your mother and father wanted to erase every trace of Grace's existence, including her child. They hired someone to make sure the baby was adopted into obscurity, where she would never learn her true heritage or claim her inheritance." The revelation hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Natalie watched the pain flash across his face and instinctively reached for his hand. His fingers wrapped around hers, holding tight. "Robert wanted to tell you the truth before he died," Victoria continued. Looking at Natalie was something that might have been regret. "He left instructions in his will, documents that would reveal everything when you turned 25. But I destroyed them. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would leave, and I would lose the help around the house. I became dependent on having you here, on feeling superior to someone." Celeste stared at her mother in horror. "You kept her as a servant, knowing she was an heiress?" "Mother, how could you?" "I convinced myself it didn't matter," Victoria whispered, "that she was better off here than alone in the world. But I was wrong. I was terribly, cruelly wrong." Consequences and freedom. Jonathan stood abruptly. "Mrs. Foster, you will be hearing from my attorneys. What you did constitutes fraud and exploitation. Robert Foster may have started this deception, but you perpetuated it for years after his death." Victoria nodded weakly, all fight gone from her. "I understand. I deserve whatever consequences come." Natalie stood as well, looking down at the woman who had controlled her life for so long. She expected to feel anger, rage, a desire for revenge. Instead, she felt only pity and a profound sense of liberation. "I'm leaving," Natalie said simply. "I'll send for my belongings. The only thing I want from this house is my father's photograph and the few items Robert gave me." She turned to walk out, Jonathan beside her, when Celeste called out, "Natalie, wait." Natalie turned to see Celeste, standing with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I was cruel to you because Mother taught me to be. I never questioned it, never thought about how wrong it was. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm truly, deeply sorry." Natalie looked at the girl who had tormented her for years and saw something she had never noticed. Before, Celeste was as much a victim of Victoria's toxicity as she was, just in a different way. "I hope you find a better path than your mother did," Natalie said softly. "Goodbye, Celeste." A new beginning. That evening, Natalie stood in the penthouse suite of the Grand Meridian Hotel, looking out over the city lights. Jonathan had insisted she stay there while they figured out her living arrangements. The suite was larger than her entire attic room, with floor-to-ceiling windows and luxury beyond anything she had ever experienced. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Jonathan stood there with a small box in his hands. "I thought you might want this," he said, handing her the box. Inside was the silver locket, polished until it gleamed. Natalie's fingers trembled as she lifted it out. "May I?" Jonathan asked, gesturing to the clasp. Natalie turned, lifting her hair, and felt his fingers brush against her neck as he fastened the locket. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. She turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing very close. "Jonathan, I need to tell you something." "I know," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "I feel it too." "But I'm your niece," Natalie whispered. "Is this wrong?" Jonathan shook his head gently. "You're not my blood niece. Grace was my half-sister, and you're not biologically related to me at all." Richard confirmed it with the DNA results. "We share no genetic connection." Relief and joy flooded through Natalie. "Then there's nothing stopping us." "Nothing except the question of whether you feel the same way I do," Jonathan said, reaching up to cup her face gently. "Natalie, from the moment I saw you on that beach of dignity in a room full of cruelty, I've been falling for you. Not because of who your mother was, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your grace under impossible circumstances." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks. "I was so afraid to hope. Afraid that someone like you could never truly care for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Jonathan smiled, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "You mean someone brave, intelligent, and beautiful? Someone who survived years of abuse without losing her humanity. Natalie, you're extraordinary." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Natalie rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips touched softly at first, then with growing passion. And that kiss was everything they had both been holding back: longing, hope, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine. 6 months later, the spring wedding was small and intimate. Held in the garden of the Pierce family estate, Natalie wore her mother Grace's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her perfectly. In her hands, she carried white roses, and around her neck, the silver locket gleamed in the sunlight. Richard Hamilton officiated the ceremony, beaming with joy as he pronounced them husband and wife. The small gathering of friends and business associates applauded as Jonathan kissed his bride. Celeste sat in the third row. Having worked hard over the past months to rebuild some connection with Natalie, she had moved out of her mother's house, started therapy, and enrolled in community college. The relationship between her and Natalie would never be what it could have been. But there was forgiveness and hope for something better. Victoria had not been invited. She had sold the mansion to pay legal settlements and moved to a small apartment across town. Sometimes Natalie thought about reaching out, offering some gesture of peace, but she wasn't ready yet. Perhaps someday, as Natalie and Jonathan walked down the aisle as husband and wife, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the orphanage to the attic room, from servitude to freedom, from loneliness to love. "Happy?" Jonathan whispered as they paused for photographs. Natalie looked up at her husband, the man who had seen her worth when everyone else saw only a servant, and smiled with her whole heart. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." That night at the reception, Jonathan stood to give a toast. "I spent 10 years searching for my sister's daughter, believing I was rescuing her from obscurity. But the truth is, Natalie rescued me. She taught me that family isn't just about blood or inheritance. It's about choosing to love someone, to see their worth, to stand beside them no matter what the world thinks." He turned to Natalie, his eyes shining with love. "You walked into that gala expecting mockery and found your destiny instead. And I found mine in you." As guests raised their glasses, Natalie felt the weight of the silver locket against her heart. Inside were new photographs now. One of her and Jonathan on the day they met, and one of Grace and Thomas. The parents she never knew, but whose love had created her. She was no longer the mocked adopted girl. She was Natalie Bennett Pierce, beloved wife, cherished family member, and finally, completely, truly home. The little girl who had once clutched a silver locket in an orphanage had grown into a woman who knew her worth. And the billionaire who had spent years searching for his lost niece had discovered something far more precious, a love that transformed everything. Their story was just beginning. and it would be written not in tears and servitude, but in joy, partnership, and the kind of love that conquers all.